Tomorrow from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m, South Africans will finally cast their ballots in the local government elections. We've seen heated campaigning by political parties and independent candidates wooing voters with a long list of promises. Let's expand on this now with elections analyst Wayne Sussman. Thank you so much for your time on this early Sunday morning. I mean, we were just discussing off air where some of the major parties have gained a lot of momentum and a lot of support. So just based on the campaigning that we've seen over the last few weeks, heading to the elections, what is the general sense you're getting in the key metros in terms of political party support?
Great. So what happened in 2016 was that you had an ascendant opposition in the Democratic Alliance and the EFF and a vulnerable ANC led by Jacob Zuma. And in this election, it's a much more competitive field. So you've got a lot of new parties, particularly in the metros, parties like Action SA, the Freedom Front, Good. So you're going to see the IFP making a rebound. You're going to see a much more competitive landscape when we all go to the polls tomorrow.
What about independence? We've just run a package now about a young man in his early 20s who's been nominated by the youth in his particular community. Your sense on the success rate that we'll see with independent candidates?
In metros, to be honest, I think it's harder for independent candidates because there are so many candidates running and the wards are very, very large. So you might be known in the particular suburb you're in or a particular part of the ward, but I think it's very hard in metros for one independent person to be known across that whole, the entire ward boundary map. So also something to bear in mind is when we go into the ballot boxes tomorrow, the ballots papers are going to be much longer than usual. And I think in my ward there are 32 candidates running. Now this means, imagine going to the shop and having 32 brands of toothpaste. You might fall back on the toothpaste you know best because it's going to be an overwhelming experience. So it's very hard for independents to shine through and be the candidate of choice.
Right, and earlier in the week we ran an Ipsos survey around coalitions, and the data showed, of those that were surveyed, that more South Africans are actually keen on coalitions. And I found that very interesting because given in 2016 in the major metros, Johannesburg, Nelson Mandela Bay, Tshwane, those were a disaster, but people are still keen on this idea that parties can create partnerships for service delivery.
100%. So there's already the main takeaway from this election. Those South Africans who've experienced coalitions, not just in our metros, but in many large towns across this country, didn't have the best experience of coalitions. However, when we wake up on Tuesday morning and people are tuning into eNCA, they will see that many, many parts of our country are going to be living under coalition governments. So, can we make coalitions more effective in the next 5 years? Can all those parties who are going to be sitting around the table to thrash out these coalition deals understand that it's not just about them and their ego, but it's about the voters and their supporters who got them there in the first place?
Right, so obviously you were monitoring day one of special votes yesterday, and I just want to get a sense from you in terms of the efficiency of the IEC. It was obviously met with some trouble, with some protests, where some voting sites had to be shut down, but relatively the efficiency of the IEC in running these particular elections in the short space that they were given to do so, your thoughts on that?
So 100%. The time frame has been much shorter than usual, but also special voting applications was much higher than usual. I know some political parties were concerned that they were overly successful in getting too many people to apply for special votes, i.e. would the IEC be able to cope under the pressure of going to many old age homes and people who are infirm and not being able to vote, and then being able to open all the polling stations on time. There are always going to be challenges on voting day. There are always going to be polling stations which open late, but that's overwhelmingly most polling stations opened on time. across the length and breadth of this country, there was very few problems and protests. Yes, there were some violent incidents in parts of KwaZulu-Natal, but ultimately it seems like the IEC has risen to the task.
Right, and of course, I think a big worry is that even though we have a cohort of registered voters, not everybody's going to turn up to vote. Another Ipsos survey that we ran showed that people want to vote, but we also questioned, are you likely to vote? And there was quite a big or substantial amount that are likely not to vote. That's probably going to be a big concern as well.
So, interestingly enough, with local government elections, the trend has been upward, whereas with national and provincial elections, the trend has been downward. This means that more and more people have been participating in elections. I think that upward trajectory will be challenged tomorrow for a variety of reasons. We're living in a COVID pandemic time, so people might be less likely to go out and vote. Hopefully they apply for special votes. There's also general frustration for people. But let's also say, you've made a very important point here, that elections are not won on Twitter or on social media. They're going to be won in the ballot box. So yes, certain parties might be doing well on social media, but can they harness that energy and make sure those people don't treat this as a long weekend and don't treat tonight as a Friday night and go out and vote tomorrow? Because that is how the election will ultimately be decided.
Wayne, as always, thank you so much for your insights. That's Wayne Sussman, who's an analyst, giving us some insight into what we can expect tomorrow at the polls and also how day one of the special votes went yesterday.